Hello, in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do the mattress stitch 3 ways. First is a vertical seam for vertical panels like in bodies. Second is a horizontal seam. This is useful for parts such as seaming shoulders together. And lastly is a mix of vertical and horizontal seams, which comes in handy for seaming sleeves into armholes. Okay, so let's get started with the vertical seam. So I like to seam along the second stitches of each row. It's just easier for me to see things. So I'm just going to attach my yarn here at the bottom of the second stitch. See, if you pull these stitches apart, you would see a bar in between these stitches, and this is where we're going to work into. So I'm going to attach my needle again on the second to the last stitch of this panel right there. And now we are set to work through those bars that I showed you earlier. So I'm going to locate the next bar, and it's going to be right here, and just weave in my needle just like that. So I'm not going to tug really hard. I'm not going to tug on the yarn yet. I'm just going to keep weaving very loosely back and forth through the panels, just finding the bars or working up the bars on each row. Okay, so just like that. Like I said, I'm keeping it very loose, and you'll see why later. Okay, I'm going to do it one more time. So locating that bar, going on to the other panel, locating that bar, and pulling up. Okay, and here we are at the end, and all that's left to do is to just pull on this yarn so that we can close the seam. And you're going to see that this mattress stitch is also known as an invisible seam because you could hardly see where you seamed the panels together. Beautiful. Okay, so let's move on to our horizontal seam. Now for this seam, we are going to be seaming through rows rather than vertically through stitches. So I'm going to attach my yarn here at the bottom of our first panel. For this seam, we are going to work through the legs of stitches. It can get confusing to locate, but keep in mind that you are looking for upright V's like this. So see that V? So we're going to be working through those legs. So I'm going to go in this second panel, locate the first stitch, and weave my needle through there. Go to the first panel and do the same thing on the first stitch. Now back on the second panel, I'm going to insert my needle where it came out of last time, and that's where the second stitch is going to be. See that V? And then I'm going to continue doing that, weaving across the first panel and the second panel until I reach the end. Okay, and here we are at the end, and just like our vertical seam, we're just going to give this yarn a tug to close the seam up. So here we go, again just pinching the end to support it a little bit. And as you can see, it also creates a very seamless or invisible seam. So it's almost as if the stitches just kept going on. Okay, now it's time for the last seam, so the mixed seam. It's going to look something like that. So for this, we're going to locate the bars for our vertical stitches. So just like what we did before. And for our horizontal piece, we're going to locate the V's for each stitch in one row. So I'm going to insert my needle on the second to the last stitch of this piece, just because I like using the second to the last stitches. And then I'm going to locate the first stitch on the second panel, which would be, just fix that, which would be right there. So I'm going to insert my needle and just weave my yarn through there. Then I'm going to locate the second or the next bar on the first panel and weave my needle through. So we continue in this manner. However, it is important to note that due to the gauge, this seam usually does not have a 1-to-1 ratio like the other seams. You are going to need to skip some stitches in order for things to line up. The trick here is to mark where things should line up in different parts and adjust your stitches accordingly. So I'm going to continue with the seam and skip some stitches on this side to make sure it lines up. Just coming up to our last couple stitches. Now this example in particular has quite the curve just because of the swatches that I used, but most designs won't curve this much. It depends on how the designer made their pattern, or yeah. So here we go, and I'm just going to show you, and we're just going to turn it around and give it a little tug to close the seam. And of course this is not going to be an invisible seam because our stitches are going in different directions, but look how polished the end result looks like. I hope you found this video helpful and hope you have a beautiful day. Happy knitting!